Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's almost 40 minutes after 12. So we already shook hands the last 5 minutes entering the building, so I think we can make a fresh start right away. I understood that it's, the round table will be completely in English, or bilingual, or completely English?
Speaking English, only Jeffrey will speak in Dutch.
Okay. So it is, I'm really happy that we finally sitting here at this round table. As you know, this has a long history. The conversations about this meeting. It started almost a year ago in April. I was a bit surprised to read that we were more or less pressed to have this roundtable. I thought it was a kind of, we agreed to have this meeting after we invited some of the writers of the open letter. So, but I'm really happy here, and I hope that we will be able to have a real conversation for 2 hours, because I think that we might learn a lot of each other. So we will try to, I hope we will be able to listen to each other and to have also a conversation, not just one way first to one side and then the other side, but we can develop also arguments to have indeed a conversation. So I think we should start, and Jeffrey, you made the program, and the first program is Francesca. And I would like to give her the floor, and perhaps, I forgot to announce that you would be a little bit late because you have come up from The Hague and you had some problems with getting here. So,
Dus I guess for Arthur Graaf, I version you'll be late too.
Ja, ik heb nog geen bericht. Dus gaan we gewoon door hoor.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see. Yeah?
Yeah, I think the first is Francisca. Yeah.
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. The focus of the research on 45, 49, starting the narrative with the Bercia period is problematic because it leaves us 30 and a half centuries colonial violence. How does the colonial war relate to the centuries of injustice before? Already since the 1920s, the students of the Perhimpunan Indonesia in the Netherlands were kept active to propagate independence in a peaceful way through talks and negotiation. Yet the requests were ignored. They even helped the Dutch fighting fascism during the World War II, but without result. When the Indonesian Republic was proclaimed in 1945, violence did not immediately occur. From Indonesian perspective, the violence came as a surprise. The Bersia only occurred after the British troops arrived in late 1945 from Indonesia. From Indonesian perspective, they came to support their Dutch allies in neo-colonizing the country. Why is the latter Indonesian view not included in the outline of the research project? That's what I want to ask.
Okay. Perhaps to give just a first starting point of an answer, I think that will maybe return a couple of times during this afternoon. But I think that we should be aware of the fact that the main goal of this research program is a critical study of, in the first place, the violence against the Republic of Indonesia. starting in 1945 on the 7th of August. That's the main focus. And why is the main focus? Because particularly this period of violence, apart from the violence which is inherent to colonialism, particularly because this period of violence has been denied in Dutch society for more than 60 years. That's why we are focusing upon this specific period within the wider context of a colonial history. So I think that we shouldn't forget that that's the main objective of this research. So we'll start because that's the main focus. Of course, we do also a lot of work, and we include many of the aspects of colonial history before 1945, but the focus is starting on August 1945. And I think the Brescia period is one of these periods to understand what actually happened in this period. So we need that period as the same we need 1948, 1949, when the army, when there are big battles by the Dutch army, we need this period to understand what happened and what went wrong in the Netherlands, within the judicial system, within politics, within. So that's to make for me. Esther, you want to?
I can make an addition. Do we pronounce names in order to introduce ourselves for the public, maybe?
Yeah.
Esther Captain, and I'm one of the researchers that is involved with the substance of the Brescia Brigada findings. So thank you for your comments. I do think that you raise important questions and remarks this particularly, so thank you for that. And indeed, the violence of Brescia period didn't came out of the blue. I think that's very important to recognize, and we as a researcher for this substudy especially dedicated to the Brescia and Brigada violence, we do make a continuity between the violence in several periods during this period of war, but also the period of colonization by the Dutch. So we do have a lot of literature that we are using, and there's a whole lot of historiography already being made by other scholars that we include. And this colonial period of time has been researched thoroughly, and that is the work that we are using. But as Frank is saying, the focus of this research program is on the period 1945-1950. So we do incorporate it in our perspective and in our view, but the focus is starting on 1945. And I also think it's very important to realize, and I think we all agree on the table on the aim of our work is to write as much as possible an inclusive history, that we all support the fact that we are trying to write an inclusive history, and that for a lot of people here in the Netherlands, Dutch and Indo-European and also people of Chinese descent, the Brescia period was extremely important for them because compared to even the Japanese occupation, it has been more violent and also sort of traumatic. So violence didn't come out of the blue, and it's also important to recognize for people from Indo-European descent that this period of time has to be written. So we are trying to make a connection of the Brescia period as a period of extreme violence and also what the repercussions were for a later period of time. So that's why it is included. And we do make these longer lines continuities in history.
I add a little bit, because I think it goes further. Siska, you said the struggle was not freestyle from the witness in the contemporary project. The struggle and this request for independence was not recognized. I think it even goes further. People fighting for its independence were put away as prisoners of political prisoners in both Indigo and so on. So I think it's important to recognize this. At the end, you say why does the Indonesian point of view that the arrival of the Allies or the British was seen as recolonization is not included? I think we try to include it when I'm conducting some interviews with Indonesian veterans, people who were involved, especially at this period of the revolution, and they are the ones who bring in this perspective. And I think what is necessary and our responsibility is to bring this perspective in the projects and in the other projects of the research. So at least we are open, and we have to do our efforts to incorporate this the Indonesian point of view.
Michael, you want to react?
Yeah, I can respond now, but I can also do it in my own time. But since you asked me now,
I think this is a conversation, so please.
the argument that it was a sensitive time for Dutch Indian diaspora, that's my social construct also, I think should not be an argument in this, because our grandparents or parents maybe, or their parents, they didn't leave the archipel for nothing. They were indoctrinated with colonialism, and they are also not the victim. And actually, that argument that you use helps erasing our identities. There is a huge problem in our community with proxy racism and denial of our history, and not recognizing our part. My social construct's part in colonialism and in decolonization. There was a system of hierarchy, and we were not at the bottom of that hierarchy. We were not only victims of racism, but we were also perpetrators of oppression. So this is an argument that should not weigh in this research. This is a.
I want also to say, I was there in 1945, 7th of August. Nothing happened until in October. The Gurkhas of the Southeast Asian forces came into Jakarta, and I was living in a house opposite a kampung, a very big kampung, where also nationalists were living. They came with carriers with how do you call them, mitrailleurs, and shoot just on the entrance of the cantons without nothing saying. That was only the end of October 1945, and then violence started.
Going back to your comment, I forgot your name. Michael, sorry. I agree with you on that point, that it's important to address also the role of being a perpetrator. So I agree on that.
This argument is used by white Dutch to whitewash their history.
Yeah, I see what you mean, that also people of in the European descent might have a role there. And I think it is not for me a way of erasing that part of history. I think it's very important to embrace that in a way, how difficult it may be. The thing is, it is not as simple to say those are the victims and those are the perpetrators, because these roles can be shifting and changing along the time.
I agree on that, but last decades there was totally no focus on the indigenous population. There was always the narratives of our social construct and white social construct. There was never time
And indigenous, you mean what population?
I'm not going to use this racist phrase they use in the Dutch Indies.
No, of course not. Indonesian population.
Yeah, the indigenous,
Sure. Yeah.
without the European ancestors. I forgot my point.
I know what you want to say. There was more attention. It was only attention.
Yeah,
to that group and not to the rest. Yeah.
Tell that story now, because we never took the people before us never took the time to focus on that part of it. Even our National Memorial Day erased them.
But Michael, I agree completely with your argument. But what is also included in the program is this region studies, the studies in the non-Indo-European part, but in regions in Indonesia itself with local population on the local level, also to bring in that perspective. So that's what we really try to, and we are sincerely trying to do that to bring other perspectives than indeed the perspective that had been dominant so far, because you're completely right.
Yeah, but then you present this as a reason to legitimize this part of research.
Well, it's not as a legitimization. It's one of the aspects that is part of this history that has to be written, that it can both be perpetrators, but also our victims have been victims. I mean, that's also a point that you cannot deny historically.
Yeah. So, okay, we need to go to the next...
It's not very long per point.
No,
So
but
enough time.
It's worthwhile conversation. It's a worthwhile conversation.
Yes, but we need to go
Yeah.
to the next one because this is
Goed. Nederland heeft nooit goede bedoelingen. En nooit. Op de dag van vandaag. Ik ga ervan uit dat mijn inbreng op 13 september jongstleden, dat iedereen weet wie daar stond. Dus Karnov is geen moordenaar. Wel, Wilhelmina is een moordenaar. En we hebben over schendingen van de mensenrechten. En als je het hebt over Indonesië, dan bent u aan de geschiedte vast. Waar haalt Nederland het recht om een land die 18.000 kilometer ver ligt als Nederland de ziekte beschouwen? En bovendien, Nederland zegt dat de soevereiniteit overdracht 27 december 1949. En zolang dat is, kunnen deze onderzoekers niet over Indonesië hebben. Dat betekent dat Nederland, de zogenaamde Indische Nederlandse regering, die illegaal is, hun eigen onderdanen hebben vermoord en geëxecuteerd. En ik vind, niet alleen ik, maar meerdere van mij, die vinden dat je moet bij het begin beginnen. Wij zijn mensen die niet beschouwd zijn als mensen. Nederland doet alleen maar aan verdeel en heers. U weet niet half hoe mijn familie uit elkaar getrokken zijn. En dan gaat u dat eventjes zomaar doen met de Bersiap. En de vraag is, wie zijn die mensen die dat Bersiap doen? Wie zijn dat? Indonesiërs? Hoe komen jullie bij? Op de website van jullie regering staat 27 december, de soevereiniteitsoverdracht, nog steeds. En Ben Bot die heeft ook niet erkend. Te aanvaarden. En zolang dat niet gebeurt, kun je niet over Indonesië hebben. En dit is een belangrijk punt. Waarom? Als Nederland Indonesië erkent, 17 augustus 1945, die bovendien door de Japanners al binnen 3 dagen weggeschopt is. En 42. Ja. Dan heeft Nederland de soevereine staat aangevallen en dat is een oorlogsmisdaad. En het oorlogsrecht. En je kan niet zomaar dat ding opzij zetten. Dat kan niet. Dat bestaat niet en dat mag niet. Je kan niet zomaar midden in het taart beginnen. Nee, je gaat gewoon puntjes bij puntjes met elkaar delen. Daar begin je mee. En ik wil vragen aan meneer Gepoesie die 4,1 miljard euro hebben gekregen. Als je het hebt, ook meneer Van Vree, die het hebt over Indonesische onderzoekers, en wie zijn dat? Hoeveel geld krijgen ze? Waarvoor krijgen ze dat geld? Het is ons geld. Het is belastinggeld. En wij zijn daar ook verantwoordelijk voor. En ik hoop dat ik daar een antwoord voor krijg.
penduduknya sendiri.
En ik denk dat ik aansluiting op mijn betoog hier hoop dat de onderzoekers, en ook jij Friedrich, ik heb met jou vaak gesproken, en ook u, meneer Limpa, die nog steeds Indonesië gebruikt. Want ik heb u gebeld, naar aanleiding van uw boek. En u zegt, omdat iedereen dat doet, dan gebruikt ook Indonesië het woord. Nou, dat is geschiedvervalsing hoor. Want ik heb u gevraagd, waarom heeft u nou Indonesië, het woord Indonesië gebruikt? En toen zei u tegen mij in de telefoon, dat iedere historisch tot de dag van vandaag dat gebruikt. Nou, dat is geschiedvervalsing. Of je het wil of niet, dat is geschiedvervalsing. En ik geef aansluiting op mijn betoog nogmaals. Ik geef het woord aan Rogier.
Moeten we eerst even vragen aan de onderzoekers voor een reactie op dat?
Zeg het maar. Ik wil ook...
We hebben 7 minuten voor reactie naar iedere stelling.
Nou ja, de reactie dan maar.
Kort.
Mag ik het spits afblijven? Mijn naam is Remy Limpa. Ik heb het woord Indonesië gebruikt omdat voor mij 17 augustus een historisch feit is. En ik ben wetenschapper en niet de representant van de overheid. Dus ik heb daarom voor de term Indonesië gekozen. Zo simpel is het.
Nou ja, als je dat doet. Ja. Dus mijn vraag, herkent u Indonesië dan?
Als historicus, het is een vaststaand historisch feit, ja. Maar ik ben niet de overheid.
Nee, dat begrijp ik.
Ja.
But I think to say it in English, because that's important. I think that for the research program as such, we start at the 17th of August as the beginning, the legitimate starting point of the Republic of Indonesia. We are not bound to what the Dutch government, what the Dutch government is doing.
We started research at 15th August, but we reckon the 17th August is the state independence.
Wacht even, is dat de 15e of de 17e?
The 17th. The 17th.
Nou ja, mijn vraag is, erkennen jullie als onderzoekers 17 augustus 1945? Dat wil ik horen.
Yeah.
Of jullie dat erkennen?
It's a historical fact, and it's also a very important marker in the history of
Nou,
the state and nation building of Indonesia. That's a huge issue for us.
Ja, die is Peter even voorstellen.
Oh, Peter Romein, sorry.
Dat betekent gewoon die conclusie wat ik dus trek. Want dat heb ik natuurlijk ook via jullie dus gevraagd. Dat de Nederlandse soevereiniteit heeft aangehouden, dat is een oorlogsmisdaad. Toch? Is het mee eens of niet? Nee, mee eens of niet? Nee, maar mee eens of niet?
Dat Nederland hier aangevallen?
Dat Nederland een soevereine staat aangevallen.
Soevereine staat ook.
Aangevallen is, want die 17 augustus, dat is onze onafhankelijkheid. En bovendien, er komt er ook nog eens heel belangrijk, Nederland is al weg hè, in 42. Die hebben niks meer te zoeken.
It's an effort of recolonization and reoccupation, and I think that our job is to find out why the Dutch engaged in this effort. Also, in the international context of a developing new world order, the Atlantic Charter, the United Nations Organization, and also in the aspect of the developing international criminal law, the Tribunal of Nuremberg and Tokyo, the principles of those tribunals, and how the Dutch were taking reckoning of that international development. That's specifically in our line of questioning, and I think that is logical in the context of the discussions we're having.
I think I want to react to this point. I think it's great if this whole research is indeed acknowledging 17th of August 94 as a starting point of Indonesia. But it's a fairy tale. It's simply not true. Holland is the only country until today not recognizing Indonesian independence. May I please finish the point? Starting from the 1st of August. And we talked about this point already after the presentation the 13th of September. You're talking about new terminology. You end up with independence, decolonization, violence and war in Indonesia. 4950 or 4550. That's 3 lies in one sentence. Indonesia only existed for 5 days in this period. There was no war. It was police action. We were killing our own civilians. Also, decolonization didn't happen in this period. It either happened in 42 when the colony ended existing, or it happened in 65 when economic colonization ended. Not within this period. By choosing this kind of terminology, you are only helping the Dutch state to camouflage this really shameful fact of still not acknowledging Indonesian independence from 45. So that's why I'm saying you are just like cherry picking the most politically attractive terminology, shifting at will between Indonesian perspective and Dutch perspective. That's not history. That's writing propaganda. This is a fairy tale you're writing.
No, it's very interesting that you're pointing at the issue of terminology. This is one of the discussions we're having constantly in our own circle, and we are aware of the impact of choices we make, and therefore I can only say that we are still discussing the consequences of the words chosen, and well, perhaps you may count on us as professionals that we will develop more insight during the project. That is really normal for historians to work like that. But if the question is what is the importance of the 17th of August? Well, as I said, it's an important marker in the history of independent Indonesia, and you cannot deny that. There are several other developments going on, like you rightly mentioned. There is a longer continuity, but for us it's very important from the Dutch point of view to find out what exactly has caused the Dutch military violence in Indonesia. I think there is a genuine interest from most of us. For me as a person, this has been present since the 1980s in my mind. What has caused Dutch military violence, and for a long time it has been impossible to discuss this from the point of view of crimes of war. The word crimes of war was a discussion stopper, and we are moving now into a direction where crimes of war are not a discussion stopper anymore, but an analytical property, and it's up to us to find the right analytical terminology to discuss what has happened. You're right, it's important. But
I would love to have a reaction of Professor Asindi on Jeffrey's remark concerning war crimes. Do you accept war crimes?
I wrote a book in which I used the term war crime all the time. So, that's it.
Michael, and I want myself also to react a bit on Rogier, but Michael?
You use arguments like we are scientists and you can count on us, and we are doing research about history and all. But the research you're doing is about violence. So it's not just physical violence, also economical violence. So how can you not take this trick that the Netherlands uses still today to prevent responsibility, to take responsibility? Why do you go and play with terminology while this is actually a very important part that you should mention in your, because this is part of the strategy they use to oppress and to maintain their wealth they gain there. Because changing the date would mean serious complications for the Netherlands, because then also a lot of treaties like the RTC wouldn't be valid anymore. So instead of playing magician with terminology, why don't you just put this in your research that this is one of the ways they oppress still?
No, but listen, it's not a play. I want to deny that it's play, because the first title, it was start with decolonization, and that was the reason for that was because this is an international field of research. Decolonization is an accepted term in these kind of studies, and we, after discussions with a lot of people, particularly with Indonesian researchers, they said it is not decolonization, it's recolonization. You should start with on the 7th of August 1945.
But it's
And
not
that's
the
the reason-
politionele acties.
No,
That's the one
we never use the word politionele actie.
That's the one you should use.
No,
So this is how the Netherlands presents
yeah, okay,
it. This is
but
part of their
and
strategy.
and it is to us to demonstrate that's a false term because what we want.
It's the only factual term.
No, it's
There are so many legal consequences linked to that term that you cannot deny it, that you cannot change it in your research.
No, but we study the use of that terminology during the episodes that we are studying. I mean, it's obvious that it has a political background, and it's the roots of the terminology of politionele acties is a politicized one. But it's up to us to understand and to make clear why it has been chosen. And of course, you cannot say they called it like that during the time, so we're taking it over. No, it's our job to analyze, not to reproduce.
Can I add something? I'm standing on the side, but maybe I should contribute, because I think what's happening is you all say, like, we are historians, we are academics, we are not part of the state, and we can name it whatever we want. And you choose for saying, like Ben Bot in 2005, we recognize with our mouth, we recognize 45, but what I think your point is, you should explain or at least acknowledge or admit that the state that you're part of, and I mean, NIMH is part of the state, however you like it or not, it is part of the state, you are receiving government funding, so you should explain that until today, that Dutch law is not recognizing 45, and there is a reason for that. There is a reason.
It's not objective anymore.
No, but all research in the Netherlands is paid by the government, except some what they do in industry. All universities, all research.
That's another discussion I want to talk about. Why there is a reason that the Dutch law is never changed. That Ben Bot, after he said, I recognized in 2005, or I not recognized, acknowledged or pardoned in Dutch 45, that after that there was some adding only the de facto, not the jure. And that, you have to explain that.
That is a trick.
Exactly.
Maar, Van der Gekken, dat is toch gewoon een punt, toch? Ik wil het nog helder hebben.
We assume because this person used this argument in his speech during the Pakhuis and he came afterwards to us discussing this with a completely nonsense argument. Sorry, but we really showed you that you were not true, and you stated we use this date in our research, which is a false date. This is why it's so important.
No, but
I think this is something like a misunderstanding.
Why is it a misunderstanding? Why is this law, this Dutch law that has not been changed, not important?
But as researchers, we are not bound to the legal, political line of the government.
But you don't explain it. If you only say, I acknowledge 45, but you don't explain that our current government, or you don't even research what's the reason they don't change that law, then what's the point of only saying...
I think it's not very difficult to understand why the Dutch refused and why they use terms like politionele actie and why they call it excessive nota, and why, because they didn't want to acknowledge what really happened.
But until today.
Until today.
Yeah.
No, and it is to us to show what happened and what happened in during that period. That's us. Yeah. So we are. But when we would, I mean, we can. It's like circling back. As long as we use the terms that the government is still using, till this very day, the accession nota is the official point of view of the Netherlands. As we take that as a starting point, now we have to make clear that it doesn't deserve that kind of name. That
one disclaimer. That doesn't that there is no need to have a complete research about what the best terminology is. You can make this clear in one disclaimer in your research.
What kind of disclaimer?
The phrases the state uses are not blah 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 blah, but it is the official the official terms that the state uses, and the legal term also. Because when you do not add it, you're going to deny the complete legal current situation.
May I have just one question about this date? I think we all agree on this around this table that the Dutch state should have acknowledged 17 August right at the moment, but it didn't.
They still don't.
No, but the question is for us as historians, they failed to acknowledge 17 August at that moment. We cannot undo that. It's a fact that they didn't. And for the rest, it's a political statement that we may or may positions that we may or not take, but that won't change history.
But this is not about history, this is about today, the Dutch law today, and that's the question, why don't they do that?
We are not about Dutch lawmaking.
But you are by mouth saying 45 is the date. But that is meaningless as long as you don't find out why, the reason why they're not changing that law.
Why do you think that is not our purpose, to contextualize it in such a way that it's possible to understand? I mean, why do you all think that we don't?
Sorry, I'm not saying we recognize it, you don't explain that.
Patricia.
Yeah, I don't know the word in English, probleemstelling. What's your proposition? What's your proposition? Can you tell me this in a few words?
You mean of the research program?
Yeah.
Of the research program.
Because this fits into this the proposition.
Yeah.
This problem fits in this proposition.
Yeah.
Why do you do this research? Why do you use certain terms?
I think that's I started to try to summarize what it is, and that is that we want to critically study the history of the period 45-50 as a period of extreme violence.
Sorry, I want to interrupt because you have all the stages you need constantly, and he didn't finish his question yet.
Oh, but she asked me a question.
Yeah, I know. But still,
he's just repeating himself.
It's the same. He's repeating.
Account these things you say.
But he didn't finish his question yet. That all goes from this time. We have to schedule
First, I want to react to Gerard's Indy. The Netherlands recognized Indonesian independence de facto on the 2nd of May 46 already. So you're now saying that they didn't recognize it immediately.
I think the problem is saying it's not sure.
Well, it is the same kind of fairy tale that we're trying to create. I want to react on the point of the politionele actie. I do indeed acknowledge this is politically unacceptable to talk about this situation as politionele actie. But it is reality until today. And you should know the consequences of the legal reality if we would change this legal reality. I mean, I think it's Neil who was involved in research about after the Second World War reparations and now the stolen arts. And now actually where we are right now, where the Raad van de Rechtsherstel was after the Second World War. You know that it has extreme consequences if we would today recognize Indonesia at 45. So the way with your terminology, now you're hiding away the fact that we do not recognize, and you create a false presentation of reality, which doesn't really show that we still don't recognize Indonesia from 45. So in that way, that's what I mean when I say you're creating a fairy tale. This is not history. We have to show the factual history.
May I try to summarize what you say, because I think it's an observation. What you say, if you don't address that specific issue of name giving and the contrast between name giving and how we look to it now, you cover up more or less, or you silence this whole problem over you still silence. Actually, you should make it more a point of the research itself, that this terminology itself is very problematic, and that you should be aware that just go over it if you don't refer or don't come back to these old terms of politionele actie. If you just ignore them, then you are actually still ignoring it. That's what you say, which I think it's an argument that we should really take along.
Are your questions answered?
Ja,
Because we're about to
aan het discussie over wie zijn de Indonesische onderzoekers, wie zijn dat en hoeveel geld krijgen ze en waarvoor. Het hoeft niet nu, maar het kan ook schriftelijk hoor.
No, I can just start very briefly. When we started the research program...
Kijk, Bambang en dingen dat weten we.
Okay, zal ik het even in het Nederlands doen, heer Vliet?
Sorry?
Zal ik even in het Nederlands antwoorden?
Ja, maar ik wil eigenlijk zeggen dat Bambang en Wahid, dat kennen we, want ze worden gewoon natuurlijk meegenomen. Dat is makkelijk. Maar wat ik dus heel belangrijk vind is, welke universiteiten dat zijn, als je het hebt over universiteiten, en wie zijn dat en hoeveel geld krijgen ze en waarvoor is dat geld? Simpel.
Heel kort, toen we met het onderzoeksprogramma begonnen, mag ik het in het Nederlands even doen?
Het mag ook in het Engels hoor.
One more statement. On 11 March 1942, the Dutch lost their rule, their influence, and everything in Indonesia. We have 3.5 years. Indonesia has been going on with Indonesian rulers, with Indonesian population. So, what was the reason for the Dutch to send troops to Indonesia?
En bovendien...
We didn't. We ruled our own country, which we did also during colonization, except for the highest echelons.
Maar bovendien, dat is niet legitiem, hè?
No.
Dat moet toch wel eventjes erbij zijn worden. Het is niet legitiem.
I also want to to make that point clear.
Ja.
Het is legaal, hè? Want zijn we over eens dat het legaal is? Zijn we legaal is?
Ja.
Okay.
But to answer your question about Indonesia, when we start the program, as I said, it is a program on Dutch history, Dutch military intervention, Dutch war crimes in Indonesia. That's the starting point. Something which had been denied for 60 years. But what we wanted to do is to ask Indonesian researchers to look with us and to do research with us. And initially, we had four positions for Indonesian researchers written into the program. Then we started to discuss with UGM how they should evolve in the program. And then, in this discussion, came forward that they wanted to make their own program with their own research. And we said, okay, it's up to you. So it's now a completely autonomous program with 13 researchers, 4 coordinators for different universities. But it's their own program, and they are the only ones who are, and they asked us also that they would talk for their own program and that we wouldn't talk for them. So what we are doing, they have their own program. What we agreed about is that as much as possible, we have discussions, we will have publications together, we will make volumes with articles of Dutch and Indonesian researchers, but they are completely autonomous in their research.
Oké, maar we willen toch de namen weten. We willen de namen weten, we willen de universiteit, we willen natuurlijk discussiëren met hen. Ik bedoel, dat is ook nog wat. Ik bedoel, ze kunnen wel het is vet wat wij hier doen.
As far as I understood, and I'm looking to head of Irene, so that in February they will release their website.
Yes, they're going to release their own website, and then you can. They have let me know that if anybody wants information, you can contact them.
Who's them?
I think we have to move on to the next point. I think this can be answered on by email.
Okay, thank you.
We have a message.
Oh ja, hoeveel geld krijgen ze?
I have no idea whatsoever.
There was money for 4 positions for Indonesian
How much?
research. I don't know how much.
How much now? Sorry.
I don't know.
We will let you know.
Okay, it, yeah? Thank you.
And what they did in Indonesia, they put also money of their own university, so it was next.
Het moet natuurlijk ook ver zijn dat de Indonesiërs ook moeten weten. Zij moeten weten, ons volk moet weten wat ze aan het doen zijn en hoeveel geld ze daar hebben. Simple.
So they just made a promise that you're going to
Okay, thank you.
We're going to watch a video message from Michigan, from Anne-Marie Keyboard. If it's working. The time is not available. Here as well. And I handed out her text as well, as you can see, but it is loading.
If anyone wants a sandwich, please go ahead.
I will continue in English. I'm talking to you from my office at the University of Michigan, where I run the Bachelor's programs in the United States. We teach language and culture here, and the core of our curriculum is our race and ethnicity education. This core fits with the mission of my institution. I just finished teaching 100 students about Anne Frank and her legacy. They look at what my students do is they look at the diary as a human rights document, and in parts of the course they hold it up against human rights violations in Dutch and American history as it relates to racism in society today. NIELT and people associated with NIELT have a solid stand on this course and on our program. My students visit the NIELT website for information. I send them there to do their research all the time. They read articles by David Barnau, who was also a lecturer in this program. They read Harry Pape, several articles by him. And they read articles by Dinka Hondius, who has worked in collaborations with NIELT, and whom I'm talking to about a visit possibly to this campus to talk about Dutch slavery in the United States. And Evelien Gouds would have been our memorial lecturer here 3 months ago. And when I heard that NIELT was involved in this 45-49 research study, my heart sank right through this office floor. I do not know how to reconcile this. Here is a National Genocide Center that has decided to put itself shoulder to shoulder with, as I understand from the people in the room with you today, with a research institute under the Dutch Ministry of Defense, a research institute that consults the Dutch state as it defends itself against war crimes, claims of war crimes. As we say in the United States, this does not pass the smell test. But that is not even my biggest concern. I have read NIELT's defense of this research on their website in a description of the year in review at Pakhuis de Zwijger. And where's colonialism in this? Where is colonialism? Piet Hagen and 350 years of colonial oppression are buried somewhere down at the end of the paragraph. And this is not okay. For a National Genocide Center, 350 years of rape, torture, exploitation, and slavery should be the beginning, the middle, and the end of your research. It should not be a side note, it should not be an afterthought. And anything less than that is a whitewashing of history. Gans and Hondius were very clear and brave about this. Nivellering, the Dutch word nivellering, leveling. We cannot level the suffering of Jews in a genocide with the suffering of the non-Jewish Dutch in World War II. And here is NIELT in a glaring case of double standard, signing its name under a study that in its very conception has a cultural relativistic view of human rights violations. It's an attitude of let's look at 45, 49 from all sides. Let's look at it from all perspectives, all sides. And I've heard this before, not long ago. I heard this attitude from my current president, who after Charlottesville, seeing neo-Nazis walk down the streets in Charlottesville, said, there were bad parties on both sides, bad people on both sides. In Indonesia, there were no bad people on both sides. There was one bad party on one side, and the rest fell out from this. Because 45-49 is not the story of 45-49. It's the story of 350 years of oppression and human rights violations. And human rights are absolute. They cannot be negotiated in the Dutch Polder. They are, in their definition, non-negotiable. And so it's very troubling that a genocide center, which is a hop and a skip away from the International Court, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, has apparently found a way to look past this. And so my question is specifically for Neild. How do I explain Neild in a human rights curriculum this coming week when I step into class and my students and I read Barno together? I mean, this is not, I'm not making a political statement here. I have no agenda. I am genuinely stuck here. My students implicitly trust the research direction I send them in, the websites I send them to, and I do not know how to explain this. I do not know how to explain Neild's role in this research, and so I don't know how Neild knows how to explain this to the Netherlands, to the world. And so I hope that Neild has a moment van bezinning, a moment of reflection today in this meeting, and clearly, unequivocally distances itself from any cultural relativism in the face of oppression. And so I ask Neild that it advocate for the inclusion of all important court documents of 45-49 cases against the Dutch state. Sit down with Jeffrey Pondaaf, sit down with Liesbeth Zegveld, find the most important documents and include them in the write-up of this study. I say that also because the truth will out. Documents will come to light. And Neild knows this. Neild understands what happens when you bury documents, such as documents about a ship called the Van Imhoff. You know what I'm talking about. And so that's one question I have for you. The other question I have for Neild is that you advocate for an independent write-up of the conclusion of this research, not by one of the 3 research institutes that's signed on the dotted line here, but by an independent institution. A write-up, a conclusion that 350 years of oppression deserves. Because you are the genocide center. Thank you.
I think this question is first of all addressed to me as director of Neild. I'm a bit worried, a bit surprised, and it feels a bit like that we need some better communication, because what she referred to some issues, like the book of Piet Hagen and to Evelyn Gans, and I have written side by side with Evelyn Gans against grey history in the Netherlands, against Chris van der Heijden, some articles against the leveling of history.
Are you railing against your point? Because
No,
you're disqualifying her question.
No, I don't. I definitely don't. So I think that I take serious what she says, and I think this is not how we stand into this research. To be sure, this is not at all. We are not leveling history. We are not relativizing. human rights violations. Not at all. That's not what we want.
Yeah.
And if she reads that from our website,
We all do.
then we have to change. No, that is not what we are doing.
It looks like it.
Laten we
We
dat
have
zien.
to accept it.
But
We are
God
all
says
doing
he
that.
wants to
That's
do
why we're
something
here.
about it. The way we see it, we want to make it right. So let's listen.
Yeah.
He's gonna change the.
I mean, this is so. If this is what people read from our website and from our program, then we did something completely wrong in our communication.
But can you answer the question? You're working together with the Ministry of Defense. Can you explain that?
That's another question. Why we work together with the Institute of Military History? Because this institute works under the same rules as we do, and that's the rule of the Royal Academy of Science about independent research.
But we all know that the same institution is not helping the victims that Jeffrey's organization is bringing to court. We all know that.
Sterker nog, hoorde vrienden zeggen tegen mij dat ze geen slachtoffers zijn. Ja, dat zegt hij tegen mij, dat het geen slachtoffers zijn. Bovendien heeft hij ook nog gezegd in een radioprogramma. Dat onze slachtoffers, dan heb ik het over de Indonesische slachtoffers. Dat zijn geen slachtoffers. Dat zijn wacht even. Ik kan je wat zeggen, maar dat heb je gezegd. Ik bedoel, hoe noem je dat? Ze zijn getuigen. En als ze getuigen zijn, we hebben tientallen zaken in de rechtbank. Waar zijn jullie? Tientallen. En er staan dossiers, die kan je lezen. Wat onze slachtoffers hebben meegemaakt. De mannen die worden geroepen, net SS'ers. Hoe ze zeg maar van hun huizen, 's morgens vroeg, naar een pleintje wordt geroepen en de namen wordt geroepen. En dan horen knallen maar alles daarop. Wat zijn jullie? Vanaf 2006 ben ik aan het procederen.
En in
het boek is het opeens het boek van Remy Liepach. Begin het onderzoek naar aanleiding van het boek van Remy Liepach. We zijn in 2006 bezig. Dan hebben we weer gewonnen in 2011. Zuid-Sulawesi.
Jeffrey, did you bring the document of one of the court documents that is very clearly referring to the role of NIMH?
Oh ja. Dit is maar eentje hoor, wat ik heb meegenomen. Dit is van de afgelopen 10 december. 12 keer wordt NIMH hier genoemd. Dit is een pleidooi van de staat. En dan zeggen jullie dat NIMH onafhankelijk is? NIMH heeft onderzocht wat meneer Lambogo, die zijn hoofd is onthoofd. Maar wat zegt NIMH? Er staat niet in ons dossier. Er staat niet in ons archief. Dus er staat niet. Ze erkennen wel dat hij dus gewoon was, maar ze erkennen niet dat hij onthoofd is. Omdat, zegt NIMH, dat het niet in het archief van de NIMH is. Dus, sorry. Hoe moet je nou onafhankelijk zijn als je er staat in de rechtbank, niet alleen dit hoor, dat is al vanaf, weet ik veel wanneer, vanaf 2006. Dus zeg het maar.
Heb je niet toegespannen aan de...
Ik wil nog een aansluiting daarvan. Jullie hebben in 2016 of 17 een namenlijst, 350 namen, met naam en toenaam, hoe ze geëxecuteerd en vermoord zijn. Wat doen jullie ermee? Wat doen jullie ermee? En ik heb gevraagd aan de staat om samen met ons te onderzoeken. Bovendien staat een aantal namen die hierin staan. Ja, die hebben al schadevergoeding gekregen. Maar de staat zegt, we wachten tot het NIOD en de KNTV en de NIMH onderzoek klaar is. Met andere woorden zijn ze allemaal dood. Maar wat doet NIMH zelf met dit onderzoek? Wat ze dus hebben gevonden hier. 350 namen met naam en toenaam. laten we niet lachen, jongens. Het is gewoon, voor mij is dit onderzoek is vanaf begin af aan, en hoe ook meneer Ghezos-Indi daarmee omgaat met zijn boek zit te leuren daar in Indonesië, om alleen maar de harten van de Indonesiërs daar zogenaamd, oh wat zielig zijn die veteranen.
Jeffrey, ze hebben nog geen antwoord gegeven.
Ja, maar goed, ik wil dit even afmaken. Hè, hoe zo zielig ouders zijn maar die veteranen. Hè, hij vertelt niet in zijn boek over de mensen die vermoord zijn door diezelfde veteranen. En hij vertelt niet over de 6000 Indonesië-weigeraars en bewust Indonesië-weigeraars genoemd, niet Indië-weigeraars. Daar heb je het niet over. En dan gaat hij over de Brescia doen.
Let's first ask a response from NEMH about the relation to the court cases.
Yeah, okay, we've always been, I'm the director of the NEMH, for those of you who don't know me. We've always been quite open about our role in the court cases. That was also in the Q&A on the program's website. What we do is that we independently carry out what's called historical verification. So the facts put forward in the claims, we try to verify those facts as best as we can in our archival research. We try to substantiate them as best as we can. And sometimes, unfortunately, the archives are not as complete as we probably wish, and then of course in our verification study we have to say, okay, there is no proof, there is no evidence for this claim, we haven't been able to find it, and that's the only thing that in that case we do. And in other cases we do find evidence that supports the claim, and of course then that is included in the verification study. And again, the verification study is historical work, and we carry it out as we do all our research in accordance with the norms and the standards that we as professional historians have to abide by.
But do you recognize then that you are representing the state in this and not representing the victims that he is representing?
No, because
je kan wel nee zeggen, maar het is gewoon zo.
Well, that's your view. That may be your view of the matters, not my view. Because what we do is that we carry out historical research to verify.
But for the state.
It's
also for
the request of the state. It's also a request of the state.
And you do that. So
yes. Yeah. Als je dat doet, dan heb je de zaak aan Moko, dan ben je naar zijn sollicitatie gegaan om daar te onderzoeken of het inderdaad waar is dat hij zijn hoofd verdient. Maar dat doen jullie ook niet. Dus jullie komen niet op voor de mensen waar wij voor opkomen. Kijk, de weegschaal ligt het zwaar bij de Nederlanders. Het is gewoon zo. Ik woon hier bijna 15 jaar, ik weet niet anders. Als je het hebt over dit onderwerp. Vanaf 69 ben ik hier begonnen. Toen ik hier aankwam. Toen zat in juli daar, 69, die access er al daar. Nou.
So, and do you take the claims that are proven into account in the New York study?
Of course.
Yeah, that's the answer. The question is more direct, actually. Annemarie asked, are you three institutions prepared to sit down, not with NEMH now, but on the side of Jeffrey together with his lawyer Lisbeth Zegveld? Are you prepared to do that? That was one of her questions.
I think the answer is quite easy, because the radio program that Jeffrey was referring to was about a complaint that Lisbeth Zegveld said that when we were talking about touchdown, we were talking about victims, and when we were talking about the news, we were not talking about victims. And this is what I didn't agree upon in this. So it's a kind of complicated discussion. Rightly after the radio broadcasting, Jeffrey called me, and the next month of May, I went to Jeffrey to talk about it, and that's at least was an attempt to start the discussion. And this Zegveld also said we want to talk, so we are really prepared to talk with. And one of the things that I asked Jeffrey at that point help me to bring us and the voices of the people that you're standing for into the program. It's what I said to you, to bring it into the program. And I think this still stands. And another thing that we did is we put on the research curriculum in the intranet of our research programs all the cases that Lisa had put in the court, and we also tried to find those documents that are not directly available through the internet, on the internet, because we think it's very important that all the researchers in whatever part of the project has the access to these important witnesses.
But I think from the start, Jeffrey was not included, so you can take up his documents and then include the documents.
I was the program didn't start at the only project that started. The program was still starting up, and the only project that started was the Witness and Contemporaries project. And at that point, I already started the discussion.
Yeah, but he's not just a witness. That's what the discussion.
No, he is not. I was talking with Jeffrey Harris to bring
to share.
Bring the voices together. We have to bring the voices in.
Yeah,
and I think that's an open question.
That you wanted his archival documents. What did you want then from Jeffrey? Did you want
to cooperate with me and bring in the voices that are
zover heb je nog niet eens met mij over gehad.
I said, help us to bring in the voices.
Nee. Ik heb mijn documenten daar staan boven. En je wil zeg maar eens kijken. Ja.
Conclusion?
I think
dus niet wat dit is.
go to the next point, but yeah,
just a small remark. This is a small remark because I think it's always difficult when institutions are, called because it's like having no faces, it's like a big institution. But I think on an individual level, there have been a lot of contacts with the organizations that are here and that we share our thoughts with. And so I read Jeffrey's remark also as an invitation to come and visit you also at the court cases again. And also, pay tribute to the work that you've been doing the last couple of decades. So you've been very important for us. And
het is openbaar bij de rechtbank.
Yeah, but again, good to know. And I read it as an invitation for us as researchers to take that up seriously.
So I hear no answer to either of the questions Anne-Marie put. Are you going to give the answer in writing afterwards? Because we're out of time now.
Are we what?
Sorry, yeah,
giving the answer in writing to the
to her questions. If we're running out of time, we will answer in writing.
Okay, I have one more question. Does anyone know why Jeffrey's organization wasn't included in the first place? Because then this whole discussion would have happened actually. Why? Like, why was in the outline of the research his organization not involved?
Maybe also in writing because we're running out of time.
I know this. But in what you mean as in the research program or in the Klankbord group or?
Yeah, start with that. Yeah.
Okay,
that was part of my question, so I'm already running into my own question.
Sharp knife activist is the answer.
No, I mean, it's just like, imagine that it's a German research organization that goes to the Netherlands to investigate the Holocaust here in the Netherlands. And they don't include any Jewish organization in Germany or here. That's so weird. Like, I don't think a Jewish organization would accept that. So why in the first place wasn't Jeffrey invited to organize this whole research design?
Or take part in the Klankbord.
Yeah, or at least take part, because I think 4 en 5 mei, all those committees, they are all in the same blind vlekken, blind spots, as your organizations already are.
So it is the question on the Klankbord group. Let me be short. It was the Klankbord group consists out of umbrella organizations of various social groups in the Netherlands. That was the idea, and there were no individuals included. We decided to have this umbrella organization and to discuss with other groups, Indonesian and Dutch groups separately, and that's why we invited Jeffrey already and Marjolein already in a rather early stadium we invited you to in the 1st September.
Yeah, but I'm not part of the social resident group that is doing
No, but what we tried, and that was the meaning of the invitation 1 year ago, to have a regular conversation with.
That's too late. I'm talking about
we were talking about the Cloudboard group. We were talking about the Cloudboard group. So I gave an answer that was meant to be an umbrella organization, and to have separate conversations with different groups, like the PPE, like with other groups.
That's later. From the start, you did not invite
that's a second question. Why were no conversations with Jeff, with the group, with Jeffrey and Lisbeth in an early stage? I was not involved, so I can't give an answer. Perhaps somebody, you were not involved here. Peter, perhaps. So I came aboard in 2016.
Sure. And what I can answer is that there were the 3 institutes who were still around the table now. At one point, published an article in Volkskrant in 2012 saying, we are jumping from one incident to the next, assessing whatever, and so we're talking war crimes, we're talking about violence on a far greater scale than is often acknowledged by the Dutch government. It's about time that the Dutch government starts funding serious research about this. From that moment on, the 3 institutes have been lobbying for that, and at one point the Dutch government, after saying no for 5 years, said yes. So, I mean, that's the history.
Yeah, but why when you design a project, a research project, it's quite clear to me that you at least ask a diverse group of advisors. And that's not what happened.
Well, we are 3 scholarly institutes. We were, in our research, we said, we want academic historians to be part of it.
That's why we should first talk about the social resident group. Why was Karel Cobain not invited to take part in that group?
It was a year and a half to get you around the table here. We've been asking for this meeting for a year and a half.
And we didn't hear anything up front to take part in the social resident group. We were not
social resident group.
It's a
of Dutch umbrella organization.
He lives here in the Netherlands for how long already?
Yeah.
He's not Dutch enough to.
No, it's not what I mean. What I mean is that the Stichting, the Jeffrey Stichting, is not an umbrella organization like the others is. And what Frank just said is that apart from the social resonance group, we talk with other groups and in Holland and in Indonesia. And maybe we started a little late to that, but we do it.
So your answer is because Jeffrey Karel Cobain was not taking part because he's not an umbrella group.
Nee, ik snap het niet. Ik weet alleen dat het een paraplu is, maar ik weet niet wat ze mee bedoelt, hoor.
We have to move on to sporting raining.
Half hour over time, and you keep claiming time from the research organization, repeating what we heard 100 times. You can read that on the internet. Now, please put on the movie. They were half an hour over time, and you didn't answer one of Annelie's questions.
I think we did.
We are going to watch a video message from Australia, from Melbourne, from Pia.
Before I introduce myself, I would like to acknowledge that I'm staying here on the story I hate and respect to the other parts as well as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the wider community and beyond. Indigenous
Een beetje harder kan dat?
Yeah. Before I introduce myself, I would like to acknowledge that I'm standing here today on a stolen land on what always was and always will be the land of the Polynesians. I pay my respect to the others past, present, and emerging, as well as to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the wider community and beyond. Indigenous sovereignty has never been cited in so-called Australia, and I try to be mindful of this in everything I do. My name is Pia Hamid Walker. I'm a Japanese Indonesian living in Australia. I am one of the signatories of the open letter Tante Francisca Sandy-Bilohi, whom Jeffrey Conrad initiated. The truth is, I'm an historian, I'm a political campaigner, and an international practitioner. I learned the history of Dutch colonialism at schools when I was spending my formative years growing up in Surabaya. I was taught to remember the years, events, and people for the sake of partner foundations, and not to critically comprehend the historical conditions given. What the historical lessons in those classrooms are made for the benefit of the Dutch government or the Indonesian government, I do not know, and I will never know. We need more research on the politics of history education in schools. Am I right? And that's why your research into the independence, decolonization, violence and war in Indonesia 1945 to 1950 has attracted my attention. But if I'm not a historian, why bother? I'll give you an eye perspective. Here's what most people forget about how it feels to be a post-colonial subject like myself. I did not experience how it was being under the Dutch colonialism, nor was I part of the independence struggles in 1945 to 1949. But I did experience what it meant to be constantly expected to follow the footprints of colonialism, from how should I look to how should I value my success. And as an international development practitioner, those colonial values are pretty much well in life. So that's the nexus between myself and this research. I do not recall really how I found out about your research. It was most likely from the social media. I have been living in Australia and I have supported the indigenous struggles and sovereignty. And so when I heard about this research, I jumped out with excitement just because it is called decolonization. And I think it was about the time. But I guess I was wrong. I couldn't find anything substantial in the website in regard to this project, how the research is going to be conducted, used, and for what purpose, who are involved in this research project. It has been very difficult for me to conclude the impartiality of this research if everyone involved has been talking past each other, and you do not actually address the concerns most people are having. We claim that this research is going to be critical. We have, in fact, excluded critical voices such as those of Tante Francisca and Jeffrey from participating and contributing in the decision-making process related to this project. Why? Inviting Jeffrey to speak for 10 minutes in one single event for the purpose of disseminating this research is not considered participation or contributions. It is tokenizations, one of colonial characteristics. It's said to engage the local Indonesian researchers who, according to French and they are the actual brown faces with white masks. They will do whatever to make their masters happy. As historians, I'm pretty sure you have heard the tactic of David and Emperor. I adored this term when I first encountered it in the secondary school. It sounds very sexy, deadly. The only time I have used this tactic was when I hated someone and listed all the bad things in the world that happened to them. I guess I have been internalizing the colonial concept subconsciously. But don't you use the same tactic for this research too? What do you think? And thank you for your time to listen to my video question.
Yeah, so basically I already referred to her question in the video, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more on, because it's so vague, Indonesian people that are involved in this project, that we still don't have an answer on it, so it's still going to ask more about them, but what kind of sources are they going to use? Because if they use the exact same sources as we here in the Netherlands do, then I don't see the diverse perspective evolving into this research project, and it's just the same blind spots that we all keep on having since we all grew up in this colonial way of thinking.
May I first address one of the questions that she asked on the paper and in the video? And I feel a bit, or I think she is talking about Indonesian researchers who are the brown faces with white masks. And I think that's I think denigrating for our Indonesian colleagues.
Oh, that's the question now.
Yeah, so I feel really bad about that because I think that's insulting for them.
Yes,
to consider that. And I think secondly, and then that's I think I answer her question. That the fact of the independence and the autonomous character of the Indonesian research program makes clear that it's not the Videt Impera. They have their own program, their own line of research, so this is not the case. And then, so that I think that's for her questions, and that's.
But how can you be so sure of that? Because maybe those historians are educated in the same system as we are here in the Netherlands, so we still have the same Western perspective on history. So as long as that's not, how you say that, so long as you don't recognize, then they will come up with the same results. They will look at history from the same perspective as you already do. So I don't see, how does that bring diversity into this research project?
I think you grossly underestimate our Indonesian colleagues, but I find it very, very difficult to discuss this while they're not around.
Yeah, and also because, well, you at least, you don't even acknowledge the importance of post-colonial studies.
No, I wrote something else about post-colonial studies.
Well,
but anyway,
You also underestimate how it is to be mentally colonized, the impact. And,
yeah, I think that's really something that we should take in
let's be fair, what would be the alternative?
Yeah. Can I just add? Because I think you raise a very important question about the sources. No, but about the sources that we are studying. And the very tricky thing about this is that the colonial sources and also the historiography has been written from a certain Dutch perspective, but we do need those sources and we do need other sources. But I do think that the researchers in this program are aware of the fact the sources are indispensable. We need them to start writing it, but they're also inadequate. So we have this both double vision on it, so we know that we cannot do without it, and we do have to take extra effort to get other visions in. So there's extra work to be done, but the sources cannot be done without. So it's both indispensable and inadequate, and I think that's a way of working with this consciousness of that. At least for me, that's how I try to work on this, and I cannot talk for the Indonesian researchers, but be sure for the Dutch, I'm not sure that's the correct way of positioning myself, but in our sub-study we try to work with the double consciousness.
So, may I ask a question? Why did Indonesian researchers refuse to work together with you?
They didn't refuse. We are working together with them. But
you still are?
Sure, definitely.
Autonomous.
Well, that's something else. I mean, they said we are far more interested in writing the social history of the revolution rather than looking at that military armies with well, just devise your own.
The focus is different, not because of a dispute or.
No.
The focus is different, but they're working in the same areas, for example.
Okay.
Same cities, same.
I understand.
May I ask once more? If in your research is now the one of the items is colonialism, why is that only the Persia period your main research problem? What do you, if colonialism is one of the items, what about the Aceh War? What about the Balinese genocide? What about the Lombok expedition? And all the 600 wars written down by Kit Hagen? Have they not an influence on your research?
Absolutely.
That's my only ask.
Of course, yes. Clearly they have an influence on our research, and I think it's one of the challenges to find out about the colonial context and the context of colonial warfare to explain why the Dutch behaved in Indonesia like they've done between 45 and 49. I think that's very important, and it's not just about practices, it's also about the colonial mindset and the mentality. Our study is not just about the facts, but it's also about the underlying mentalities, the underlying long-running, centuries-long running ideas of why colonial efforts would be justified. To be brief, it is all coming together between 1945 and 1949, because that's our first research into that. But we cannot do that without understanding the longer-term connotations. And I think that if you ask for that, yes, that's what we do.
Ja, maar met alle respect. Wat geprogrammeerd wordt, is het BSIAP, toch?
Nee, wacht even. Nee, luister.
Sorry hoor.
Misschien eens zijn.
Sorry hoor, sorry. Maar dat is de BSIAP. En ik wil er nog bij zeggen, want daar staat hier duidelijk in. En dat heeft natuurlijk Han ten Broeke gezegd. Die moet erin.
There are only 2 out of 40.
Je kan van alles zeggen. Maar het is zo.
Jeffrey, 2 out of 40 researchers are working on the BSIAP. 2 out of 40. So that's the amount of time and that we are devoting to the BSIAP.
That's not the point, it's the way how you frame it. That's what we're discussing.
Kom op, ik woon hier al 50 jaar. Je mag het gewoon, hoe noem je dat, verbloemen met een andere bloem of zo erop. En in feite is het gewoon zo dat jullie gewoon zeggen van, kijk, de Indonesiërs die hebben dat ook gedaan. Daar gaat het om.
We're running out of time.
Okay.
Next point, please. Are you still Yeah, it's no, it's
Yeah,
really
by far.
I have one more question. Maybe you can answer via email. Like, what will be when the Indonesian group comes with results? What will be the part of their results into the Dutch end result? Like, are you going to compare them, and what happens if they are not the same? Did you think about it already, or?
I can answer you by email if you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Then Hadi Purnama, if you want.
Thank you. My name is Hadi Purnama. I'm now working on my PhD at TU Amsterdam. I was part of the PPI in Netherlands together with Jantje, and I was also involved in this discussion since the beginning when we had the first discussion about this issue with the KITLV in Leiden, and then the second one was at TU. I was, it was kind of like very interesting issues for me, especially because I'm working on the issues of human rights and international law. My research is on the issues of human rights in Southeast Asia, including, of course, Indonesia, and then how the human rights need to be protected and also promoted in Southeast Asia. However, regarding this research, when I arrived here, it was kind of very interesting for me to see how we see the same effect with different view, especially about the history between the Dutch and Indonesia during 45 to 50s, because somehow Dutch still Dutch government, still recognized Indonesians' independence in 1949, but Indonesia independence is on the 17th August 1945. So that was very interesting. But from my perspective, especially from the international law perspective, it's the history of colonialism, and then also how the United Nations issues regarding self-determinations. It's only came about very late, and then it's become a mainstream idea on the, together with human rights. It's only after the 1960s, because at the beginning, I think United Nations also still recognized colonial territories, and then that's also very important because that's also recognized that the international law also part of the colonial framework at the time, although now it's gradually evolving. And then my question is that how do you perceive this? Because this research will have legal consequences from either from the national or international perspective, because such as what have been worked by Jeffrey with KUKB on the issues of the Rawa Gede, for example. It's seeing that from my point of view, from the legal perspective, it seems that at the time, because it was in the Hague court, which means the existence of Dutch government in Indonesia, especially in Rawa Gede, is still existed at that period of time, because the government, the Dutch government, took responsibility by paying the compensation. And then this is also making clear that the effort at the time to reclaim territorial, colonial territorial in Netherlands, indeed, from the Dutch perspective, or Indonesia at the time, so already proclaimed its independence, become very quite. It's quite a very confusing issue, because the consequences when of this research, if you said there is a violence and there is that the Dutch is wrong, it's going to have the consequences that the Dutch should pay compensations at least, or to recognize that what the Dutch did during 45 to 50s, it's something that's wrong under the international law. And then if the result is a difference, it means it's a half different kind of legal consequences. Because all Indonesians who are under the Dutch can go to the court in this country to ask for any kind of compensations because of that. So I don't know how it's going on, but the impact will be very huge in both countries. And then I don't know how it will be defined in the research itself.
I think the question is very clear. I also rephrase over there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, due to the time, I have to leave here. I don't know how long now, but is it possible to answer this question directly to this email by one of you?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say in the first place that this is a very fascinating topic, and I'm struggling with that myself.
But we have no time now.
Yeah, I'd like to
give us some time.
I'd like to give some answer now.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we could have done this whole session in writing. I think it's a very fascinating problem, and I'd love to sit together with you discussing it, because it's fascinating to think that the Dutch were operating under a changing international law system and international system of United Nations and everything, a new international world order framework. And they were participating in Nuremberg, they were participating in Tokyo, and at the same time they failed to recognize that this created a responsibility for them in the Dutch East Indies. Yeah. Of course they recognized it in practice, but they didn't recognize it formally. Yeah. And on all levels, civil administrators, military people, legal people recognized on the Dutch side that things were going on like we had known here under German occupation, as well as the Indonesians under Japanese occupation. So there was kind of a pushing away of guilt by making it small. I have written an article that's called War Crimes are the guilt of others, because you cannot imagine yourself to be guilty of war crimes. And this is a thing that has to be disentangled. So I'd love to sit with you and discuss this issue further. Because it is explicitly part of our research program.
Waar haalt Nederland het recht van, Peter?
Wat zeg je, Jeff?
Waar haalt Nederland het recht? Je had die mensen, je kan het niet goed praten, joh. Kom op.
I don't think I'm whitewashing in this case.
But perhaps because you posed this question so often, waar haalt Nederland het recht aan? Nobody around this table thinks the Welsh handwrite for colonialism.
Nou ja, ik zou zeggen, zet dan met grote letters daar, zeg maar op jullie website.
Was het zo self-evident?
Zeg het dan. Dat is het duidelijk.
I've written it down many times.
Ik ben niet met je eens hoor.
I think it's really time to...
Nee, jij doet uitspraken joh, op de radio en televisie, dat wil je niet weten. Ja, maar goed. Arthur, ook nog niet?
Yes, Arthur. Ja, dat is niks hoor.
Gebeurt niks, ja.
Thank you.
My name is Arthur Graaf. I am the spokesman for the AFVN-BVA, that is the Dutch Anti-Fascist League. We are associated with the Fédération Internationale de Résistants in Berlin, which comprises of some 20 anti-fascist European organizations. And we are, in this case, backed by the FIR. That being said, some of my points have already exhaustively been put to the table, so I'll skip those. I'll make one or two opening remarks and then I'll put my 2-3 questions on the table. I would like to stress that all the invitees here are shareholders. Most of them are activists, which you seem to object to, as you have said openly in the first presentation. And as you have said, it is an impossible venture to start this research in this setting. We concur fully. From the background of our organization, which was funded in 1965 by people who survived the Nazi occupation, it's obvious that we look especially to, for instance, the group of draft resistors in the period we're talking about here. And of course, their position is always linked to one other issue, and that is justice. At the first presentation in 2016, I put to you, it was the first question from the public, what are you going to do about justice? And you said, it's not our aim, it's not our goal, I'm an historian, we don't do justice. I would like to ask of you, how do you think about the phrase that history judges things? An historian, in my view, and the views of many people gathered here, is that history serves just one purpose, not to provide databases and records, but to provide the conclusion of all that. Then another point, going back to 2016, is that in that meeting, General Scheffer, you know him, the president of one of the veterans organizations, asked distinctively not to use the term war crimes. And you concurred. You acknowledged. It's on tape. It's on video. So, have you since changed your mind? I'm very curious, because just now, you, on my question, said, I use the term all the time, but do you mean that you will acknowledge that war crimes have been committed all the time, 45, 50, by the Dutch military, by the Dutch state? Okay. To Mr. Director, Mr. Van Vree, I have been the editor of a website on World War II for 8 years, and I've written about World War II many times, so I know your institution well. And I revere Dr. de Jong, who wrote, of course, the series describing the history of Holland during the occupation, and from which perspective, well, we all know which perspective. It was the perspective of the victim. That's necessary. And now you have entangled yourself in a study that's using the perspective of the perpetrator, as has been already put here. So, are you aware that you have changed over, and is this the institution that is fit to do that? Okay. I think that concludes my points. Just checking. I guess I'll leave it at that. Most of the other points have been covered already. Thank you.
Apparently 30 seconds. This institute has always dealt with perpetrators and victims. And the Koninkrijk, these 28 volumes, I think half of them is about victims and half of them are about perpetrators. So that's what history is. It's about processes. It's about the need to understand what happens. So I don't agree that Ludo was only working on victims, particularly his work on Indonesia.
Just to be sure, I didn't imply that, and I didn't say it.
So I don't feel that he made a change.
Of course, he included reactions from the Nazi side. Of course, he did that, and he studied all their documents. Of course, he did that. But he drew the line. He made the conclusion, and of course, in this case, for everybody here, the Nazis were the perpetrators. The Nazis were wrong from 1933 on, from 1926 on, etc. Okay, I don't have to tell you that. It's just for the record. So, de Jong was never was in trouble with any of the victims. Of course, here and there, some people differed, and some people, but in general, people were glad he could continue his work and he finished it. And of course, criticism on details is possible, but he gave the story from the victim's point of view. And it's like you said, it would be like the Germans coming here, especially, for instance, former Nazis, coming here to write
by the German state.
To write the history of the Nazi occupation of Holland. Okay.
So many German historians who have written with support of the German state or German private organizations about the occupation of the Netherlands. The most famous one is lately Katja Habsburg on the persecution of the Dutch Jews. And nobody objects to that. We're working with Germans like professional historians, and they have a keen eye in particular on the issue of perpetratorship.
Yeah, but they're not blaming the victims to be the perpetrators. It's different.
No, and of course, none of we do either.
Well, I don't know that we are talking, the discussion on the Russia is in this relation.
I wish we were in the position that German historians...
Black Nederlanders, hoor. We moesten black Nederlanders.
Yeah. Sometimes German historians also write this history like the Snellebert as an excuse for the German violence in the Netherlands. Nobody is buying it.
The Germans have gone through a process of moral cleaning, and we have not. We have not. I was in Roermond last September.
Yeah.
I stood there amidst the aging veterans, all of them 80, 85, 90 years old, who still salute the perpetrators, their colleagues, who died in Indonesia, killing Tante Francesca's family.
Yeah. Okay. Perhaps I should answer. You have 3 questions. First, I would like to set the record straight on something. There's nothing, I've never said there's anything wrong with activism. I said, there I have different responsibility. We all know that an activist such as Putin in '69 or Jeffrey Poldag in the last 2 decades have been crucial in bringing this whole war back into a public debate. So there's only appreciation for activists. What I've said...
Well, that's clear.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've written that down also. Anyway, what I've said in public is our responsibility as academic scholars is something else. So that's one. Second, we don't do justice. What I've said in response to questions, so what's the next step, lawsuits, whatever, I said, well, that's not our primary concern. Our primary concern is to feed debate on this war and on war crimes and so on with solid empirical research. Finally, about war crimes, I do not recollect what, and you say it's on tape, so I of course I believe you, but I should remind you that 2 years before that debate, I published a book in which I'm talking about war crimes. It did not make me particularly popular with the veterans, and I use war crimes all the time, and I sort of like make calculations, and so it's quite clear that this war crime is not incidental thing.
Maar ook in deze tijd, so I can write to General Scheffer, Professor Osindi, sorry Mr. Scheffer, General Scheffer, I'm sorry, Professor Osindi has changed his mind.
No, I did not change my mind. No. Look, what I've said in my book, I've used the word war crimes all the time. That's the center, that's the core of the book. So what else do you want?
Great. And I think one last remark. I think I consider the way the Germans deal with their past and went through their guilt, history of guilt, should be an example for the Netherlands.
Example to be copied as quickly as possible. That's
but
not
we are trying to
simple because have you, when you started this project, have you asked yourself, are we the right people to do this, or should we let this one pass?
But I am
so to the Swiss, or the Liechtensteiners, or the Venezuelans,
but would you think
or the indigenous Australians to judge us?
But wouldn't you think that it's sort of like a matter of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't? If we don't take up the challenge, everybody's going to say it's colonial.
So you shouldn't.
Establishment
institutions
fail to take up the responsibility. We decided to take up the responsibility.
You put your finger on the wound. Exactly. You should have said in that case, if there's so much doubt, okay, not this one for us.
Yeah, but if we don't, then everybody will say, look, they shy away always from.
Well, too bad. Would you like my handkerchief?
No, I'm not.
This is very
Listen,
This is very
the Institute also dealt with Srebrenica and the Dutch policy in Srebrenica, and that led to the fall of the cabinet.
Yes, and that's Srebrenica, the Millennium House excluded.
No, but
for
listen,
a reason.
I only want to say that we have to go over our own history, and if we don't, we are to blame. To be blamed.
If you don't take up this,
you are not the people who are fit to do this. It's as simple as that. Don't you get the message?
Well, we get the message that you think we're not able to.
And not me alone. I'm not alone here. It's as simple as that.
137 people signed the open letter who share the same concern. It's a serious thing. I think the last speaker today.
In any case, thank you for your answers.
It said it's about the 4.5 billion builders. That is quite actually not completely correct because I will explain, and I'm going to ask you not to interrupt me. I know there will be a lot of things that might trigger you to interrupt me. Please save it till I'm done, because this derailing really takes time, and I'm just going to start. Indië verloren, rampspoed geboren. Of course, this is about the financial side of this violence and colonization, and it's an essential part of the research about independence of Indonesia. You cannot seriously do research about the end of colonialism without telling the story
about the end of 315 years of economic exploitation, which resulted in the Roofstaat. This is a research about the end of the colonial oppression. Colonial oppression is driven by exploitation and by stealing on a big scale. You cannot describe the end of colonial oppression without describing the end of this stealing. This end started at 1949 as a central point. You should describe it not only in your next research, but also in this research. Because the money is the beginning, the end, and the middle of a colony. Dutch Indies was considered to be a company meant to make profit. It is also, for that reason, it's for me unexplainable that this money issue wasn't part of your research, a separate part of your research to begin with. That is also why we are very pleased with Mr. De Vree's promise from the 13th September that the research for this year will focus on the financial side. Because of this research, we have some demands, because we do not know what you're going to research, so we better make these demands now. So you can keep you can add them in your research and keep them for consideration. We want to add some research question to your research about the financial interest of the Netherlands in the Dutch Indies. This should be a separate part in your conclusion, a conclusion that is written by an independent person for reasons that some people already mentioned, but also because the Heer Oost-Indie doesn't understand racism, he doesn't recognize his privileges, and he dismisses the narratives of non-white people, of profound anti-racists, and of academics. Another demand that we make is that your publication about 45-49, out of respect for human rights, has a clear part about the Dutch stealing in it and about the racism that was reason for this, or legitimizing this stealing. This should be as a topic research very thoroughly. That is your job. We would like to help you with our perspectives, because we also did some research and found documents. But we also expect that our call, our demands, will be publicly announced. We will do this right after this meeting on social media and on through a press release. Since the end of colonialism only stops after the financial oppression stopped, and because the economic situation from before the period you're investigating was influential for the situation during the period you're researching, the period of your research is too short, too constricted. But this should not be a reason for you to dismiss these research questions, considering the importance of the subject and the completeness of your research. These financial issues are also important because your research is focused on violence. And violence is not just physically violence, but it's also emotional violence or economic violence, which also has a huge impact to the people. But also money can be a reason for the excessive violence that was used. There are too many situations where it's plausible or even assumable that money played a very important factor in the violence and in the amount of violence that has been used. Central was that the Dutch tried to get back something they saw as their property to restore the pre-war income they had. So, obvious research question would be, how big was the pre-war income from Dutch Indies, and how dependent was post-war Netherlands of this income? The mindset of that time, or the narrative of that time, was that Dutch Indies was responsible for 13.7% of the BDP, but this is actually disproved by academics in a more recent past. Clearly is that the 13.7% were considered as a fact in that period. We all know the expression Indië verloren, rampspoed geboren, a slogan from a brochure from 1930s. That was, because of this mindset, very popular during the period that you're investigating. The loss of such a substantial part of the BDP was a factor in the decision to start the first political action, politicized action. And that, therefore, it should be a very important part of your research. According to Leids historicus Professor Klein, the Netherlands was in 1947 on the edge of bankruptcy by a shortage of foreign currencies. So everything they had, everything was put to get this colony to win this political actions and to get rid of the resistance warriors actually that were occupying agricultural land. So they could start the export again from Indonesia to the US from agricultural products. They succeeded also in this. So there is a clearly economic factor for the violence. The second, I will call it an attempt for invasion. This restore of the export wasn't necessary anymore. And also they received the first payment of the Marshall Plan. Still, the same Marshall Plan turned into a reason or a factor that could have contributed to violence. Because the international resistance against these second police-verleden actie, and because of the pressure of the US to not start a second political action, and because the Netherlands did it anyway, there was more pressure on winning this war, because otherwise, well, they would lose a lot of income. And so a possible question should be, what influence did the economic interest have on the severeness of the violence? The US threatened to stop the Marshall help, as I said, and eventually also did this for the part that was reserved for Indonesia. When they would also stop the help to the Netherlands would have two financial dramas, because then they would miss the income of the colony, but they would also miss the Marshall Plan money. We can assume that this situation put extra pressure on the succeeding of the invasion, where extreme violence might have been tolerated or even considered necessary. So a more specific question would be, did the threatening with ending the Marshall Plan was a decisive factor for the use of excessive violence? Also, there should be research if the Marshall, the money of the Marshall help has been used for these military campaigns, and if not, where were these campaigns financed with? Because the Netherlands had a debt of 23.6 billion in 1945. This was so high because it became 6 times the amount as before the war because of the war. Netherlands also lost a substantial part of their income. Also, there was a country that needed to rebuild, and Netherlands lost their very important income from the German economy, of course, because that collapsed due to the war. Also, these military campaigns were even larger than the French military campaigns they sent to Algeria to prevent decolonization there. So this is a massive invasion, and it should have been very expensive. So a possible research question would be, where did the money for these military campaigns come from? In the RTC negotiations, which resulted on 20, this is the wrong date, but it doesn't matter. This which resulted in the independence. The FINEC was a very important issue where they argued long about. The FINEC resulted in a very disadvantaged position for Indonesia because they had to pay 4.5 billion to their occupiers. Because the period of the second invasion attempt and the RTC negotiations overlapped, it's possible that one might have influenced the other. So, yeah, I don't have to explain this. So, a possible research question would be, did the financial demands of the Netherlands caused or influenced or maybe made this invasions longer? This question we can only answer when there's an exact overview of all financial obligations the Netherlands had or started until that moment. Because those obligations can also be the reason that the Netherlands persisted those demands of those billions which they want from Indonesia for their independence. That's why there should also be an overview on how the Netherlands fulfilled these financial obligations. 3 possible research questions would be, how dependent was the Netherlands of the Marshall help? How dependent was the Netherlands of the 4.5 billion they wanted from Indonesia? And how much did the politionele acties really cost? This research, does it acknowledge that Indonesia paid? Because there is a lot of, there's a lot of speculations about this. And actually, for example, Gisela Molemans, a journalist that wrote the book Opgevangen in Andijvenlucht, claims that she found documents in the National Archive in Washington which state that Indonesia never paid. Well, you say that it's not true, do you? Or this is not true? So, that Indonesia paid.
This particular, how do we answer your paper? I mean, this is the final question?
No. This is just a question that I need to go further.
It's one of the research questions that comes up when you're trying to get the general picture of the economic history of the conflict.
So you did not research it yet, you mean? Or?
There's lots of publications on this issue, and we will certainly weigh them in. For instance, if you're discussing the Marshall Plan impact.
I'm just talking about, did Indonesia pay parts of this 4.5 billion? That's not a hard question.
It's a very hard question because there's several answers are possible.
Well, there's only one answer possible because we found the proof for this.
Yes, but there are several conflicting opinions on that.
There is no opinion. There is we have found evidence in the National Archive, state documents that state the exact amount of the.
And several authors have different opinions on that, and we will be very happy to take the results of your research as well. But you should, for instance, make a difference
do nothing.
It's just a yes or no
You're
question.
derailing.
Can you
So
stop
the
derailing?
question is you don't know. Okay. We do know. No,
we take it very serious.
No, you do not take me serious because in the beginning I asked not to interrupt me.
Yes, but
I just ask a question yes or no, and you
if
can
I
start
answer, I
derailing
don't
immediately. No, that's not answering. That's derailing. Yes or no would be sufficient.
No.
This is not an
I'm
exam.
gonna-
This is an
On the
exam.
contrary, I only wanted to say that the question.
You can respond later.
How much later?
When I'm done. Yeah, I'm sorry, but you are the ones that put pressure on the time and wanted us to do all this in 2 hours. So don't steal my time. It's your turn later.
But do you have your answer now? Is it
They don't know.
It's not a yes or no answer.
Why is it not? It is paid or it is not paid?
Did Indonesia pay or not?
Michael, please continue your story.
Okay.
Please continue your story.
Okay. I can tell you they did.
Yeah, good.
And we also know we have several documents that state that Indonesia paid loyally, and we have documents that show exactly what the amount was right before they stopped the RTC treaties payments. Also, we know that the Netherlands, by guessing and by fraud, actually, by a person named Hirschfeld, came to the amount of 6.5 billion because the Netherlands assumed that Indonesia would not pay the debts that they had at that moment. To ensure themselves that the Netherlands would get that money, they demanded billions of guilders too much in the RTC treaty. This guessing was also most likely the reason that Indonesia started nationalizing these companies. Indonesia discovered that these politionele acties were much more expensive than were estimated by Cochrane, who estimated 2 billion, which they took off the demands for the RTC. That means that Indonesia paid too much with their payments for the RTC treaty. To ensure themselves to get the money they paid too much, they started nationalizing and freezing the payments that they promised and stopped the RTC. So, you do not know if there's the answer yes or no. Well, I do, I can show you later. But a possible research question would be, are these official documents there, which Griselda Moleman claims? Because that means that the Dutch deliberately committed fraud. Also, nowhere in the researches about the economic recovery of the Netherlands, there is a mention of the billions from Indonesia, while this amount was almost exactly the amount of the complete Marshall help. This means that Indonesia paid a huge share to the industrialization of this country, especially when you come to conclusion that the cost of the politionele acties were paid with Marshall help money. This is also the conclusion, by the way, of Professor Klein from the Leiden University. So, a possible research question would be, where did the Indonesian billions went to? What did they spend it on? This question is relevant because the negotiations about this possibly made up billions might have influenced the length of the politionele acties, with all the extra violence coming out of that. The questions I mentioned are essential for your conclusion of the research. And when they won't be a part of your research, then your research isn't legit. We will conduct research for ourselves also in that case, which will influence your research or your conclusions, well, guaranteed. Finally, West Papua was hoe zeg je dat? Een hindernis? An obstacle, thank you. Where in the RTC only was agreed that there will be an agreement in the next year. the Netherlands never followed up on this promise. Also here might be a very important role for the money. Because in 1936, in West Papua, the Netherlands discovered a huge gold mine. We know by now that the Netherlands was the only party at the negotiation table that knew about this gold mine. So also this subject should be investigated more, because it adds to the violence if this is true. So, dear researchers, you have work to do. Because I think you agree with us that money was, connected unmistakably with the violence. J.P. Koen already knew this 400 years ago, actually, when he said, zonder handel geen oorlog, zonder oorlog geen handel. Where is it in your research?
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think you raised very important questions, and many of these questions we are aware of that they are really important, because economics played a major role, not only in 1945 but also in 350 years before. So I would be very glad if you could give us your questions also on paper.
That was my. I'm going to change because I added some things.
Okay.
We have it ready.
Because I think most of your questions will be raised in research, because we have to understand the answers, because it was there in the daily policy. Perhaps Peter can say something about, because we can't around. We have to deal with it.
Okay, I can also give you I'm not going to give you the documents we found, because I don't want to give away the source, because I don't trust the Netherlands. Sorry, it's your job also, so you should have access to it. But I can show you what's in it, because it's really disgusting how the Netherlands thought of this plan to extort billions more from Indonesia, and maybe even created or I don't know. It's just connected to the violence, so you should take this.
Well, one of the interesting challenges, Michael, is to find out how this monetary impulse worked out on the ground. Exactly like you say, how did it prolong, for instance, the military operations? Did it cause excessive violence and everything? I think that's very important, and that's probably one of the issues that is going to come out of the regional studies program. My colleague Rolf Fracking has written a very interesting PhD on what happened in the Pasundan in the late colonial periods during the war, and the violent aspect, as well as the connection to local business and trade, is very important. So yes.
Also not for that only, also for generations now that are waiting for payments, while the state just says no back pay, no blah blah blah.
10 years ago, this institute published a book on back pay, which has not been dealt with properly by the government. I agree to that, but this book is basically giving all the facts. I agree.
But it's not really making his point. I know the book. I read it.
This is about back pay, and I'm not talking about back pay. Well, because it could be linked to it. That is why. It might solve another issue, which is not my main issue.
Maybe the NEO can fund the publication of his findings, so that you can ask to use it in your research.
I'm gonna send them that, but I'm gonna send it with.
Met de bronnen.
No, I'm not going to do this. I do not trust white institutes. No, yeah, you laugh. You have a history you have a history. The Netherlands and all their white institutes have a history. Yes, and you tried also to dismiss this during this meeting. You have a history of being not trustworthy about making deals and. At the last moment cancel these deals or make it a trap, these deals. So no, I do not trust and it's not you, maybe it's intelligence that I don't trust, that might get to this document and destroy it. Yeah, so I can give you the what's in it, but I'm not going to give you the location.
No, what we now did, we just agree that you sent us your notes, your questions.
Yeah.
That's what you...
And all the proof that comes with it.
Thank you.
All right.
I think we are arriving at the final conclusion. I think that one of the main problems is. Oh yeah, sorry. You wanted to say a few words?
Ja, ik wou toch nog wel wat even zeggen. Ik heb de hele ochtend geluisterd, ik ben hier gekomen. Ik heb een paar simpele opmerkingen. En de eerste is in ieder geval dat sinds ik in het gebouw ben, ik alleen maar mensen heb gezien die op u lijken. Dus ik wil vragen van hoe divers uw personeel is. Dat gaat u vast wel zeker wel kunnen beantwoorden, dat moet toch wel kunnen nagegaan kunnen worden. Maar de opmerking die ik wilde maken is dat al deze mensen hier, ja, die kunnen veel beter hun zaak verwoorden. Want u ziet duidelijk dat ik niet uit Indonesië kom, maar ik kom uit een ander misdaaddossier. En ook in dat geval, zodra het gaat om dit soort zaken, dan is het gekronkel en gedraai en kofferen en noem maar op. En daarom wil ik u meegeven, kijkt u, ik ben nazaat van het slaafgemaakte van de transatlantische mensenhandel. Ook in dat dossier bent u zo schimmig. Ik wil u meegeven dat we in Suriname hebben een spreekwoord. En dan moet u goed opletten. Ik ga het eerst in het Surinaams zeggen. Je kan kiberen je grandma, maar je man kiberen koso koso. En luister u nou goed wat het betekent. Je kan je grootmoeder verbergen, maar de gekeuch ga je niet kunnen verbergen. Zolang u zo blijft draaien om de waarheid heen, gaan we niet stoppen om op die deur te blijven kloppen. Dus doet u ons een verzoek, stopt u ermee en schrijft u of publiceert u wat werkelijk de waarheid is. Draai er niet omheen. De agressie, de aanzet tot agressie, die is vanuit Nederland gekomen. En wat deze mensen allemaal hebben gedaan, en wat wij hebben gedaan, is reageren op die agressie. Klaar, af. Dat moet uw uitgangspunt zijn. En van daaruit moet u uw ding doen. Dat is wat ik in ieder geval nog wilde zeggen.
En ik wil zeggen, als er een boek komt dat gewoon heel erg biased is en eurocentrisch, ik bedoel, over een tijdje staan jullie er dan allemaal gekleurd op en dat wil je toch niet? Je wilt toch een goed boek hebben dat het dan destijds doorstaat en het waarheidsgetrouw is en niet een cover-up uitgeven, want dat staat ook voor eeuwig dan vast.
Dank u wel. Ik denk dat we in dat opzicht echt het zouden willen. Dat is, ik durf echt voor die 25 onderzoekers te spreken, dat we dat ook echt willen.
Meneer, mag ik nog een laatste vraag stellen? Kijk u, ik ben nazaat van de slaafgemaakte slaapoffers. Ik zie, toen ik hier binnenkwam, ik zag dat bord daar bij u voor de deur, waarop uw naam staat, oorlog, holocaust en genocide. Nou, in allebei dossiers hebben die afschuwelijke dingen plaatsgevonden. Ik weet alleen maar, en Jeffrey woont hier 50 jaar, maar ik woon 56 jaar hier. Het enige waarvan ik hoor is de holocaust die Joden betreft. Nou, die groep mensen, die heeft zich schandalig gedragen tegenover mijn voorouders. Wanneer gaat u daarover publiceren? Want ondertussen, worden ze in de schijnwerpers gezet, maar hun eigen daden, hun eigen misdaden, daar heb ik nog nooit wat over gehoord. En het is algemeen bekend dat ze niet zo echt jovel waren met mijn voorouders. Dat is in ieder geval, en dan gaat het, als u werkelijk uw naam gestand wilt doen, dan doet u wat juist is. Klaar.
I have also one concluding note, just to summarize our main concerns once more. Of course, thank you for having us here. After such a long email exchange, we have conveyed to you the serious problems with your research. We have told you that 350 years of colonialism, its illegitimacy and its foundation in racism should have been at the center of your study. Instead, you have taken the right perspective of taking the Bershab as a point of departure. We have explained how this research has serious conflicts of interest that delegitimize it. and we have questioned and made demands about the planned write-up of your study. Finally, we have laid out the importance of carefully examining and describing the end of the Dutch robbery of Indonesia as examination that should start in the current study and continue as a set of future research questions. We expect a continuation of this discussion in which we are considered serious thought partners from this point forward. And I think our main concern is that we can raise our concerns as we did, and then you can say, yeah, we take it seriously, but as today, we don't see it reflected on your website, on the outline, in the questions. So I hope you really take this into consideration. And yeah, thank you.
Now, we are at the end. I would like to thank everybody here present for this afternoon. I think I'm exhausted. I don't know how it's about you, but I think that we had indeed an exchange of opinions and sometimes discussions. And I hope really, and then I speak as the director of the DIOP and one of the 3 institutes that perform this research. I think that there are lots of things that are said that we have to take and that we will take seriously and take into consideration in the rest of our research. And I hope we'll find a way to prolong this discussion. Yeah.
Maybe you can also consider where you invite guests that are, descendants of colonialism, because this is really offensive when you're inviting us in.
Yeah.
Since this money is paid with money from our ancestors.
I know, and I can tell you that I have next week I will review a last version of an article which describes the history of this building, which is indeed paid by one of the founders or one of the inventors of the coolie system in Indonesia, and who was actually accused of killing 7 of his laborers. And so this is built with blood, but it has also performed a lot of other function as a tribunal after the Second World War.
I'm talking about me being invited here.
Yeah.
This is.
No, but I say that we are aware of this building, but we can't move somewhere else. So it's like, but I'll take it into account.
Mag ik dan het laatste woord gebruiken? Ik wil zeggen dat ik vind nog steeds dat een instituut als het NMA niet erbij hoort, omdat het niet onafhankelijk instituut is. Hoe je keert en draait, hoe je ook je best doet, zit een vies luchtje. Dank je wel.
Dank jullie wel. En wel thuis.